Phansi capitalism phansi. Phansi capitalism phansi. Phambili nge-socialism phambili. Sanbona nonke, sanbonan. It's so wonderful to have you here and so lovely to be here with you all. It's really been such a wonderful experience, such a phenomenal experience, this. Thanks for joining us for the final edition of the Economy is Care Popular Dialogue series. It has been such a phenomenal experience traveling this journey with all of you since August when we started. It's also been just so special to see this community stick with us and grow in this way. It's wonderful to see familiar faces, people who just keep coming, repeat offenders in the movement towards socialism. In our lifetimes at that. And it all suggests to us that we're tapping into something at least you guys who are here have all been wanting to see more of and to be a part of. So we are really very grateful for you making people of us with this very small idea that we had and didn't really know what was going to happen with it. So nalibitso laka ke Sekwetlane, and I'm from the New Economy Hub, one of the conveners of this series, where we and the work we do is to build, scale, and amplify authentic social support and even demand for a new, socially inclusive, and ecologically sustainable economy in South Africa, in Africa, and in the world. A lot of the work that we do is really about navigating and thinking out loud together to co-create the concrete pathways that will get us there. I think we're at a point now where it's no longer enough for us to be interpreting the mood of society or interpreting the movement. We actually have to build a movement. We actually have to arm ourselves with knowledge, with propaganda, and with enthusiasm. What in the Eastern traditions they call viridia, right? The energy with intent to be able to really realize the world that we've been calling for so long. Now, as you know, we've been working with Oxfam South Africa and the cultural workers at the Community Arts Mobilization Project who are out there at the desk to produce this 5-part dialogue series, which has become such a firm fixture of our weekends these last almost 3 months. I'm almost sad that it's over, but also a little bit relieved to have some Sundays back. And I think that many of us here might feel the same way too. I should forewarn you though, that just because we'll be pausing doesn't mean that, and this is the last one, doesn't mean that this is the end of Economy is Care. It just means that we're really going to retreat, reflect, rebuild some more, and scale what we've been doing here, not only here, but in other parts of the country, so that we can really scale this and amplify this community, so that we can really now concretize our march towards economic liberation for us all. Now, why are we here? Why are we doing this? I think it's important just to reflect a little bit as we come to close this series, just to reflect on where we are in terms of economic thinking and practice in South Africa and across the world. I think globally as well as here at home, we're at a crossroads, right? And this crossroads is really characterized by this deep rupture of social dissatisfaction, political rupture, the kind of ecological crises that we find ourselves in, and also the recurring economic crises that keep coming back and hitting us wave after wave over time. Just to give you an indication of just how old I am, I think I've lived through now at least 3 global economic crises, not counting COVID and what it brought about. And we're now on the precipice of a 4th major one, which will come with a systemic debt crisis that may very well tank everything like it did for most people back in 2008. Um, what that moment and what these crises produce and also reflect for us is that we're living in astonishing levels of wealth concentration and racialized as well as gendered inequality, all of which are not only eroding human development gains, but also causing social fragmentation and these major peace and security crises that we've been seeing over time. We have the structural dependence on coal, oil, and gas to power our economies that run on overconsumption and which enslave us to the pursuit of surplus pleasure, which threatens the survivability of life on this planet in order to secure the wealth of a few billionaires. As a result of this, and according to the indicators of Global Climate Change Report, we are on track and on time to breach the 1.5 degrees limit, the global heating limit, in just 3 years. We have a 50% chance, which is a sure chance. If we stop everything today, we will, in 3 years' time, be hitting 1.5. Now, all of these crises converge in the structure of the global economy and its local expressions, what we've been talking about for over the last 4 editions of the series. These have to do with the inadequate flow of support for climate mitigation and adaptation efforts by developed countries for developing countries, which have also emboldened petrostates and multinational polluting companies to double down on fossil fuel investments and economies that are powered by these sources of fuel and economies that are anchored in fossil fuels. We've got this unfair debt system which continues to trap developing nations such as our own in perpetual cycles of debt and distress through short-term dollar-denominated loans which are priced at outsized interest rates, right? This interest rate cycling that we heard about with Duma's panel a couple of weeks ago is not a thing that is unique to South Africa. It's happening all over the world and there's a global consensus around it. And all of it is really impacting not just us here, but even the rich countries in the north and the people who live in them around, what is possible for ordinary people, given the fact that the interest rate cycling is there to incentivize and enrich wealthy multinational corporations and dollar billionaires to be able to accumulate wealth. The last of these that I want to maybe kind of point us to is that the governments of rich countries remain unwilling to cooperate with those of poorer countries like ours in preventing the theft of revenues. This idea of illicit financial flows we keep hearing about, literally tax theft. From our shores to the Cayman Islands, to the Panama to Panama, to Mauritius, and other tax havens, so many of whom are also in Europe, like Switzerland and so forth, Liechtenstein and so forth, where our wealth is taken from us, stolen from us, and then it's hidden away there in order to enrich the super wealthy elites of our world. They're not only stealing the tax revenues, but they're also refusing to assist us to tax billionaires and enable and empower us to tax billionaires and multinational corporations. This has meant the foreclosure of the possibility of poor countries being able to afford ourselves the means of financial independence and development for our people. This is really the essence of what we're trying to speak to here with Economy as Care. We want people-led, people-centered development, but someone's got to do it. And in order to do it, that someone or those people need to have an incentive. And what we're trying to do here, and the idea that we are sharing here, is that we've really got to arm ourselves with the knowledge and the language, not because we don't know the realities, but in order to be able to call bullshit on the bullshit that is being thrown our ways. Don't tax billionaires, you'll produce capital flight, right? These are the ideas. Don't raise wages, it'll chase away foreign direct investment. But what happens when FDI and the people who are behind it are themselves scaling their wealth in stratospheric levels when wages haven't been able to keep a pace with the cost of living produced by these self-same guys who are with their manufacturing, with their commodity trading, and also with the financialization of the fundamentals of life. Food is financialized. Right? Food futures and securities are being sold and traded. And so a country like ours, which has a lot of wealth and a lot of agricultural productive capacity, we still see people who are starving because they cannot afford food. Now, the series is really a bid to reanimate our aspirations for a capable and accountable state, and thinking out loud together, led by practitioners in this field, about what we can and should do to mandate a responsive and developmental state to be at the center of driving socially just and inclusive growth and development for our people. All through the series, we've covered 4 topics so far. In the first one, Beyond GDP, Dr. Lebohang Pheko led us in conversation around GDP. What really counts as growth? Who benefits from it? And who gets left out? In the second edition of the series, we discussed debt and discipline, where Busisibeko led us in a rich conversation about how the country borrows, who benefits from it, and at whose expense that borrowing happens. In the third, taxing fairly and spending justly, Thoko Madonko, who will be joining us again today, reminded us that the ultra-rich, these are the billionaires and large corporations, are not paying their fair share to enable us to redistribute wealth in the way that the leading party in the governing coalition promised us 30 years ago. Ordinary people are being made to subsidize the rich. And we've seen an example of this earlier this week, where Park Stau, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, said taxpayer money should be used to provide high-polluting and undercapitalized and invested in steel companies like ArcelorMittal with government subsidies. So we must enrich this multinational corporation and subsidize it with our tax funds instead of subsidizing healthcare, public education, and so forth. Why should the poor shoulder that burden with regressive tax measures like increasing VAT? I want to remind you that this didn't end this year, at the top of this year. This VAT thing is coming back again for us at the top of next year. And we have to be ready to engage when that issue is tabled once again, to say we've got to be able to pay for these things and balance the books. And we've got to say, not us. In the final edition, which was 2 weeks ago, Duma Gqubule helped us to better understand monetary policy, the quiet but powerful force that decides who eats, who works, and who waits. He drew attention to the role of the Reserve Bank could play to keep our economy strong and stable, instead of us only seeing and hearing from it every time we get an announcement around whether our bond is going to be 300 Rand cheaper or not. Now, in today's discussion, we've been bringing it all together. We're going to be asking whether we can really reclaim the economy from profit and power and rebuild it around care, justice, and shared well-being. Our host, yeah, of course we can. Our host today will be, is Matshidiso Lencoasa, Tsidi. Thanks for being with us. Now, Tsidi is a budget policy analyst and researcher at Section 27, where she advocates for fiscal policy and interventions that advance the constitutional rights to basic education and access to healthcare for all in a context of climate change. Her focus areas are on gender-responsive budgeting and the utilization of budget policy to advance socioeconomic rights. She currently serves as chairperson of the Budget Justice Coalition, the BJC. Some of their materials are outside at the registration desk. Please don't leave without taking one or several of the pieces of propaganda and research and knowledge that have been shared here with us. She's also on the steering committee of Imali Yetu, which is the budget transparency initiative between civil society as well as National Treasury. She's also on the advisory group for she's also part of the Fiscal Openness Accelerator advisory group for the National Treasury. So these are the people who are really about, let's see how these budgets are set up. Let's see how these choices are made, and let's make them as transparent and as accessible to the people as possible. CD has graduated with a master's in international education and development at Sussex University, as well as a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of the Witwatersrand. She was a Mandela Washington 2023 fellow based at Cornell University, where she took on that fellowship. So to help us answer the vital question, so whose economy is it anyway, which brings us here today, and with which we'll wrap this whole thing up. Tsidi is joined by some familiar faces, whom she'll introduce more fully. But I'd like to maybe welcome Thoko Madonko, who led that conversation around taxing fairly and spending justly, as well as Duma Gqubule, who led our dialogue on money power and monetary policy. Thank you all so much, really, for being here. Let's maybe hand it over to Tsidi and her great panel as we work through the question, so whose economy is it anyway?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to my dear friends, comrades, and people that I'm going to be friends with after this panel for joining. Yeah, really excited to be closing off the session. The series, even though, like, you know, it might be the closing off of this particular 5-part series, but it really should be the beginning of these conversations and ongoing conversations, because they're going to be ever more relevant, because we really do need to be building an economy that works for everyone. So I think maybe a lot of my friends here will attest that I'm kind of fangirling right now. But just because I'm fangirling my panel doesn't mean that I'm not going to be challenging or critical or anything like that. So hoping if I do come across as a little, you know, please call me out for it as well because of that. So that's the first disclaimer. And the second one is that as a moderator, is not really the best, like I'm not the best at time and time management. I'm a fellow yapper myself. And I think the people on this panel, Duma, are also yappers. So if it gets like that, someone like, please hold us to account, because we really do want to make conversation and open it up so that we can all have this conversation. So yeah, like with that being said, maybe I'll introduce my panelists who you already are familiar with, especially repeat offenders like me. So I'll start with Thoko. So Thoko Madonko is a civil society fave. We know that. She's an activist, but also she's a poet who can, yeah, like who's keen to express what's in her heart at any time, just saying. And yeah, she's also an academic who's currently doing her PhD in issues that we're talking about right now. So she's, you know, not just yapping about it, but converting it into something that can also change the academic field. And yeah, like that's how we know, like Thoko, she's a BJC fave, and just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity. Again, I won't fangirl too much. And then we also have Duma Gqubule, who is, of course, a household name and may or may not have inspired me to do this work now with all the work that she had done as a journalist, as a policy advisor of, you know, all these things, like being in proximity to government, all of that. But what really resonates for me when it comes to Duma is that he still stands on business. Like decades later, proximity to power hasn't like changed that like desire to build this economy that works for everyone. So I'm really, really excited, and thank you very much for being on this panel.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we can get straight into it, right? So I'm also entrusted to tie up this dialogue with some of the conversations that we had in the previous ones. And I did attend Thoko's one. And if people who were there also remember, she put me on the spot in front of everyone. So I'm also keen to do that. So I think, yeah, like what I really got from that dialogue was just the conversation about social fabric and like building a nation that works and building a just world that works for everyone, right? But what Thoko said is that, like what she reminded us, is that paying taxes is meant to be a sign of belonging, a way for people to say that they're part of this country, which sounds so like disconnected from the everyday experience that we have as people. I think the majority of people feel that they are taxed out or they're paying too many taxes. And if a finance minister tries to increase VAT, tries to increase anything, like but we're already contributing so much and yet we get such little in return. So today, I think that what we've heard also from the other dialogues is a call to measure life instead of profit, and to also challenge us to actually use the budget as a tool that can heal instead of punish people, that can actually build a nation. And so I guess the question for us, like more practically, so that we can take these conversations, like put them in our hearts and take them moving forward, and as we engage in our activism, is how do we rebuild that trust? Like how can we continue to call for, I think that's something that people even challenge us on, like, oh, if you introduce a wealth tax, like where's that money going to go? Does every single rand actually go to the intended beneficiaries, the public health users, the public education, public system users at large? So how do we make money feel like it's something that cares for people, and not something that's taken from them? And I'll direct that question to you, Thoko.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sidi. And thank you again to the New Economy Hub and Oxfam, and to all of you for coming through on a Sunday afternoon. I'm really pleased to be here. I think the best way to, because I think Siklotlani said that we should be thinking about the alternatives. And I just want to reaffirm that we're dealing, when it comes to talking about money, and Duma can come in on this, or talking about budgets, is that we're dealing with a treasury story that is a single story. And they don't offer economic alternatives. And what we need to do as part of our work, when we're talking about the fact that we live within capitalism. So, I mean, obviously there's ways of talking outside of capitalism, which is quite difficult. But if we're talking within capitalism and the nature in which the state and tax works as it stands now, and the commodification of everything, life, the planet, our ecosystem, then we need to start talking and centering care as a mechanism for getting people to talk about why it is important for us not only to care for each other, but to care for our planet and our ecosystems, and that money can play a role in the current system in alleviating or ameliorating the damage that we've done so far. So outside of, burning everything down, which is what I would love to do, and to reconstruct a completely new, different system in which maybe tax doesn't even exist. I mean, we can think of other worlds. Let's be world builders. But in the current system, to be practical, we need a practical way of countering the treasury narrative. And one of the strongest counter narratives that's available within the sort of capitalist moment that we're in comes out of the care ecosystem, and that is to recognize care work, recognize each other, to reduce who is doing the work, the burden of that work, to redistribute so that we both tackling the gendered nature of patriarchy, misogyny, gender-based violence. So we start thinking about how do we interact and create different ways of being together and represent. So give voice to people who are not in the room today, who are out there having to deal with the impacts of climate change, ecological destruction, abusive and exploitative job wage employment that wouldn't enable you to be able to attend an event on a Sunday afternoon. And then to remunerate, to make sure that we are paying a fair wage in a mechanism that enables people to survive and thrive. And so there's been this constant undervaluation of care. And I've just gone through the National Treasury speeches and guidelines from 2012, so over 15 years of literature. And not once do they talk about care. They barely talk about women. If you're lucky, you might get, and then towards the end of the period, coming closer to the 2003, 2004, we start hearing a little bit about gender-based violence. But essentially, there is no narrative here that's saying that we recognize that we want to reduce gender-based violence, that we want to redistribute wealth. In fact, it's a complete opposite, and that's the narrative that they're perpetuating. So our job, I think, is to really call for a care economy in this current system while we move towards an alternative system, that we should be calling for sustainable prosperity. And by that, I mean one in which we live well within our planetary boundaries. And we also think about people, nature, and climate constantly when we are putting our budgets together.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for that, Thoko. What really resonated with me as you're talking is about, like, we need to have the courage to reimagine and rebuild, like I think what you said, like maybe this new world that is just, maybe we don't use taxes as a tool, or maybe we do, or whatever it is, like we just need to have the courage to rethink or to imagine a world that actually works for everyone. So, and that also includes that recognizes the care and the care economy, which is also what you had said in the previous dialogue. And I think that's a good note to maybe bring you in, Duma, on this, is that in your dialogue also you had said that South Africa doesn't have a money problem. And we know this because, for example, just last week it was reported that Gauteng has a hunger crisis. There are children who are actually dying of malnutrition, which is a crazy thing to hear when you know that Gauteng is like one of the most like prosperous or like the richest places in Africa, not just in South Africa. And then also a similar crisis is happening in the Eastern Cape and other parts of the country. But when you think about it, South Africa is a net food exporter. So we clearly don't have a food supply issue. We clearly have a problem of redistribution, perhaps. And I think that also just resonates with what you had said, that we don't have a money problem. It's not that we don't have enough money in this country. We have people, some of the richest people in the world who live here, for instance. But we've actually, as you say, that we've lost the courage to use it differently. And Lebohang also had taught us that to count care, and now Thoko's reiterating that with the care economy and building that. Busi had also told us that there's food at home. But I guess I'd like to hear from you, like what it would mean to run an economy with that imagination, with that imagination and that courage. And, don't want to yap too much, but I just also want to bring it home to everyone, is that when we are growing up, I was just thinking about my upbringing. Like as a child, I know we didn't have everything and stuff, but there's so many things that my mother went through, my granny went through, my great-grandmother, sacrifices that they made that I didn't realize until I became an adult and walked into the real world and realized how cold it actually is here. And I think that yes, there's we're not trying to romanticize that hardship, but I think everyone has that story of their parents or people or their loved ones really sacrificing and coming up with creative ways to ensure that there's always food at home or there was something like that. And I think that build that love that your parents have or whoever your caretaker has, spurs that courage. Love makes us so courageous and makes us do these crazy things so that we can build, we can serve people. And I think that an ideal, for me at least, is an economy that works for all. Will have public servants that have that love for the people and know that and have the courage to build an economy or to question things or to challenge things so that it can be in the interest of building an economy that works for all. And so I wanted to ask you, Duma, is with this future, what kind of future could we build if our leaders actually budgeted, if National Treasury, our policymakers budgeted with that care, with that love for the people, the way that our mothers, our grandmothers did when their cupboards were bare?
Thank you so much, Sidi. I'm not sure where to start, but I just want to start when you're talking about, let me start where we are as a country right now. I think South Africans must understand the scale of the crisis. So GDP per capita, an imperfect measure of average living standards, this year will be lower than it was in 2007. So we've had 18 years of declining average living standards. We are heading on this trajectory towards 2 decades of declining average living standards. We are an unviable economy. We have unemployment rate of 12.6 million people do not work. I was in Malaysia for the past week. I've just recovered. They've got an unemployment rate of 3%. That's what economists call full employment. There's 500,000 unemployed people. They've got 10% of the population is migrants, and they've got 3% unemployment. So South Africa, 12.6 million unemployed people. We've got 42.9% unemployment rate. We've got for Africans, 47%. For African females, 51.4%. I repeat, for African females, 51.4%. Also, I want to say, I get so angry when people say there's a skills mismatch theory of unemployment. There are 1.1 million unemployed graduates. Each time there's a labor force survey, I ask Stats SA, can you give me additional information the way I want? And they've been doing it for a very long time. They give me the statistics the way I want them. And 1.1 million unemployed graduates. So please don't tell me that we've got a skills mismatch theory. If there was a skills mismatch problem, there would be 12 million vacancies in this economy. There are not 12 million vacancies. Now, we don't have a money problem. Let me start in our recent past. In 2024, the central bank gave Treasury 150 billion rands to pay the debt. It was ostensibly because there was a surplus on something called, I don't know how to say this, Thoko will help me, Gefreka. It's the Gefekra, the gold and foreign exchange
Reserve.
Tell me, that account, there's account, it's called Gefreka. There was a surplus on this account, there's about 500 billion rands, and they gave 150 billion rands, you pay the debt. And then I spoke to the governor, Kganyago. He explained it to me. At the end of the day, when you strip out all the technicalities, the central bank created monopoly money at the stroke of a pen. They did not touch our foreign exchange reserves. We have 1.2 trillion of foreign exchange reserves. And so they didn't touch that. They created monopoly money. So a central bank can create monopoly money. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, I was looking at the top 5 central banks in the world, which is the US Fed, the other one, the ECB, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and the People's Bank of China. They created monopoly money of $12 trillion, which they gave to the people in different forms. So a central bank can create money. That's what we're talking about in my group. And then secondly, in the wake of COVID, there was a dislocation on financial markets globally. There was an exit of money from financial markets globally, 100 billion. What happens during these people, investors dash away from emerging markets and they put the money in the safety of the US dollar. So $100 billion left emerging markets and we were affected. So there was capital flight. Interest rates went up on the bond market. And what did the Reserve Bank do? They started purchasing government bonds on what is called the secondary market. Now, so the 150 billion rands that they gave, that's called the primary market, where you issue new money. And then the secondary market is like when you invest in existing houses. I'm just a bond, like it's existing houses. It doesn't really add to productive capacity, but it can reduce the cost of capital. So if you buy all the houses, the central bank buys all the houses in West Eden, the price will go up and the cost of capital will go down. So that's what they did. This is not something that happened long. Then the third one, the UIF, they paid 64, they didn't tax anyone, 64 billion rands to pay 13.8 million people who were temporarily unemployed. I remember once I was at the airport during COVID and some guy, he said, no, people were phoning me and they said they haven't got their UIF, because we've been talking about the surplus that's not necessary. And then I phoned the UIF and they paid a few people, but they paid 13 million people. In that kitty, there is still 140 billion rands. So we have the central bank, which can create monopoly money. The central bank can intervene in the bond market and set the price of capital. Then we have what I call the SA Inc. balance sheet. We've got assets of 3 trillion rands at the Public Investment Corporation, which is the government employees pension fund, and the UIF surplus. Now, on top of that, we've got in the budget cash of 200 billion. And then we've also got foreign exchange reserves of 1.2 trillion. So we've got this balance sheet of 4.4 trillion rands, the SA Inc. balance sheet. Now, the Government Employees Pension Fund, they've got a surplus. They've accumulated surpluses of 650 billion rands over the past 12 years. 650 billion rands. And then on top of that, their level of funding is 400 billion rands above the level that is set by trustees. And then the foreign exchange reserves are way in excess of what we need to cover our imports. It's about 600 billion rand excess foreign exchange reserves. There is no universe in which we have a high debt problem. I repeat that. Our debt is 76% of GDP. In the rich countries, the world average is about 100. The rich countries, it's about 110, I think, and then emerging markets, it's about 76 where we are, and then G20 upper middle income countries, it's higher than that. So then they say, yeah, Duma, I agree with you. We have a interest payment problem, and then I say, yeah, but this Reserve Bank during COVID, they intervened in the market. They set the price of capital. Interest rates came down by 300 basis points when they invented. That's number three. Now, lastly, what is a care economy for me? I've been talking to South Africans for the past 2 years, different people. I speak to everybody, all the political parties, all of them, I tell you that. So, and civil society. We must have a mobilizing vision and plan for our economy, a minimum 6% GDP growth target. We have to understand that to create 12.6 million jobs, we can't aim a water pistol at a blazing inferno of unemployment. We have to have very large interventions to get this economy going. Not something small, something big by definition. So the first one, we have to have that it must be binding on National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. Secondly, Isabel, universal basic income is the answer. Now, let me just talk. We were working with Isabel on UBI. I've worked it for the past 5 years, a very successful campaign, I may add. Even the president has called me. He called me once. I was having one of those days where I'm dealing with the bureaucracy, changing registration of the car, going to the police station. This number calls. And I don't know who this is. I don't pick it up. I get home at 4 o'clock. The number calls again. Duma. It's the president. So I'm thinking, the president of what? And then eventually I said, oh, I'm so stupid. Sorry. So he's telling me he wants it to be part of his legacy. And he understands it. But the point is, so we did the modeling of it. So it was going to be paid to adults 18 to 59. I said, Isabel, that's not enough. It doesn't provide enough of a push to this economy. So we are going to include children who get the children. So our version with Isabel at SPY is it's given to children and adults. That's universal basic income. Number three, Nyanya, what about jobs? Number three is that I've also worked on the issue of jobs for many years with an organization called Youth Capital on the jobs issue. And we must support each other's campaigns in civil society. We must really support each other. We must not have territorial arguments and petty arguments. This year I've spoken to all the unions, but they can't agree. Why? Even the one that disagrees with me, the conservative one, Fedusa, last time they said, yeah, we're on board with you now. So I'm just saying, the job, we've got 3 public employment programs. Let's bring them together. Let's create one organization. They create about 1.9 million work opportunities, and let's put a target on them. Let's put more money into them. And one thing I forgot to say is that We can fund this with UIF surplus, and the SETAs are shocked when I did analysis of this budget. There's surpluses of 60 billion rands in the SETAs. We must take that away from them because they're not doing a good job. Put it into this thing. Number 4, obviously we need an industrial policy that's going to change the structure of our economy to create more jobs for our people. Then 5 is care, universal public services, education. I had a meeting, where I stay in the East. I was in Bedfordview with my friends from the communists live there, Alex Mashilo. I said, what does it mean? What does socialism mean for you, Duma? I said, no, socialism for me, communism, means 100% take profit out of education, free education all the way to tertiary. And I've costed it. It's not that much. It's 50 billion rands at tertiary level. That's what we should do because number 2, national health insurance. National health, I prefer national health service because national health insurance, it sounds like an insurance scheme, which it's not. Yes. So I prefer national health service. And I promise you, I've spent 2 years doing this in my spare time. I first went 2 years ago to meet Crisp, yeah. And he had just come out of an operation at, Department of Health. And he told me that, I'm a DDG. I can't afford medical aid. I only have a hospital plan. And he said his brother has a full cover and it costs a fortune. So, don't let them scare you. I've got all the papers. It can be done. Trust me. That's a separate discussion. Number 3, we must have universal mass transport, public transport. We must reimagine this taxi industry. I used to, in a previous work, be advisor to the Department of Transport. I can explain to you what we must do to this taxi industry, public housing, and things like that. Universal basics. And then the cost of this electricity, public electricity, take profit out of electricity. We can't afford these electricity hikes. I was looking from 2007 to now. The electricity price has gone up by 940%. So we must take profit out of electricity and take back those IPPs under public ownership. That's what I believe. And then and then obviously regional integration. So that is what the care economy means for me. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you see, the problem is that I can listen to Duma speak all day. So unfortunately, in terms of moderating, I might not be the best. Like I said, I did say it at the beginning though, right? But yeah, I think if there's anything that I've taken from that is that we clearly have the money is there, and we also have the tools there. What we need is that bold, courageous leadership that that takes on the issues that we're facing and saying, we want to come up with bold solutions. Yes, we might fail at this, but let's at least try. And I think that, we could re-listen. I'll definitely re-listen to this over and over again, just to study this leading up to the upcoming budget speech, the MTBPS, to just remember that there is a way to do this. All we need is that boldness. So I really appreciate the breaking down all the solutions there, Duma. So thanks for that. And I think to rope you back in, Thoko, I think we just wanted to understand. So a lot of what's in our hearts a lot about the economy is that we clearly have this economy that's so robust, the biggest in Africa, but who is it actually serving? And I think last week, the Director General, Duncan Peterson, the Director General at National Treasury, had written a piece in the Sunday Times talking about assuring people don't worry, this is going to be a quiet budget, there's not going to be any drama. But there was no mention about the people that it's meant to serve. It's more about, we don't want any drama, but it's the drama also comes from the socioeconomic conditions and the issues that people are facing. What is the budget going to be doing to address that? that. And so then it does bring up that question of whose economy is it? Like when you say it's going to be no drama, quiet, who is he writing that piece for? And so I just wanted to maybe ask you, Thoko, about like moving away from that status quo of what we have now and answering to build this economy that should work for everyone. What would it look like if our tax system actually made people feel seen, valued, protected, instead of what we currently have, which is deeply exploitative, actually?
Yeah, so I think in the same vein as Duma is saying, is that one of the main dynamics of the status quo is that the entire design of our economy is based for the people who benefit materially, which are the rich. And we're talking about the ultra rich. So when Duma is talking about trillions and billions and the kind of makeup and the way that the Reserve Bank works, the way that Treasury is working, the high unemployment, that all benefits the wealthy. They are getting away with absolute murder. And the beauty of it is that there's a bait and switch. So I just did a podcast on tax, and I was given strict instructions not to read the comments on the podcast. And I couldn't help myself.
As you always can't.
As we do.
And it's absolutely fascinating how ordinary South Africans who have the time to post on a YouTube podcast feel the need and feel threatened by the prospect of ultra high net worth individuals. So we're talking about people who are earning hundreds of millions of rands. But somebody with, maybe they're renting, maybe they own a house, they think we're coming for them when we're talking about taxing wealth. There is this unbelievable kind of, lack of a better word, brainwashing. We're all neoliberals. You know, we are concerned about the ability to access private services. So Duma and I can sit here and say we want public services for public good. The reality is the majority of South Africans are consuming news, media, programs that is telling them privatize, privatize, privatize. So this economy is reinforced by the kind of false consciousness in the Biko sense of it. So, I mean, we can also like decolonize our minds. We are our own oppressors. Mm-hmm. We have learned how to oppress ourselves and to say, well, actually, I want to be paid really well. I want a medical aid. I want to drive the latest car. I want a house. I want a mortgage. I want to be able to get onto that bandwagon. The reality is to be able to counter this economic model that benefits the wealthy, because they're sitting there. And when Edgar, the DG of Treasury, says everything's going to be calm, he's talking to the markets, right? We hear this, the markets, the creditors. Who are they? They're the Stellenbosch mafia. They're also, because the JSE is international. I mean, these are people, international billionaires. I mean, Bezos has an interest in what happens in the JSE. So these are the people that we're targeting. And these are the people that National Treasury talks to. They go on road, they don't even hide it. We're off on a road show, we're calming the markets. They're not going to Khayelitsha and calming Khayelitsha. No, we get told Khayelitsha needs to be policed. We need to increase policing. We need to increase security. We need to stop them from protesting. We don't even talk about service delivery protests anymore. Have you noticed? That seems to have been like removed from the lexicon, even though there's massive unrest and huge amounts of violence over access to resources, be it or just sheer poverty, because people are having to struggle to survive. So the status quo is one in which it is our job sitting here and with the beautiful work of Camp and other comrades, and as Duma is saying, getting together, is that we have to counter this narrative that we are all neoliberals. We have to counter the narrative that paying tax is a bad thing, that public services are a bad thing, that care should be ignored, that women should be in the kitchen. The rise of kind of getting women back in the kitchen is huge. There's a massive backlash. The trad wife tradition of getting us all back in the kitchen. So these ideas we need to counter them, and we have to counter them voraciously, and we have to be firm in saying we demand a better way of governing ourselves. And to do that, we need to govern ourselves in a way that is fair, just, and takes care of the planet. Because we cannot talk about a just budget if it's not just to the planet, if it's not just to care. So when Duma is talking about absolutely paying for universal public education, transport, housing, electricity, the models are there. We did a paper, a very small back of the envelope paper that showed if we invested 1% of GDP, which would come out of one of the pieces of the many listed things that you listed around, sitting with 1 trillion here and another trillion there, would reduce unemployment, would increase women's employment, would improve public services, back of the envelope. And that's been put into Treasury's hands. They can't say they don't know. The problem is not enough voices are able to articulate. It's interesting that in my research, South Africa has never had a fully articulated anti-austerity campaign like they've had in other countries. We've had pockets of popcorn service delivery, but not a sustained anti-austerity, which is about saving public services and reducing the cost of electricity, reducing the cost of water, reducing the cost of transport, improving the services. We haven't seen that. And I had to call a few people because I was saying, am I missing the literature? Am I just not reading, there's sort of anti-neoliberal kind of talk, but not a sustained, articulated in the way that the anti-apartheid system was an articulated anti-apartheid campaign about racism, about exploitation, about injustice. We need a similar kind of movement that is anti-austerity, because Treasury is getting away with even saying, oh, austerity hasn't worked. And we all go, oh, okay. Yeah. But they continue along their austerity, they just call it something else, fiscal consolidation, sound finance. I mean, they've got lovely language for it, but it's all budget cuts. And that's what they're after. And if you hear in the medium-term budget policy statement, if you see the word markets, that's who's benefiting from our economy. When you hear him the minister say, the markets, we are concerned about the markets, know that it's the Stellenbosch mafia, it's Bezos, there are names and faces to these people who are benefiting from exploiting our people, exploiting our land, and exploiting our very bodies in tangible ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just... I think what Thoko is saying is just amazing, so true. They convince you that helping the poor will collapse the economy. It's like, in which universe can that be true? And then, Thoko, you're 100% right. We need an anti-austerity movement. I have to thank New Economy Hub. I thank all of you guys. Sek, I thank you, Fez, and Pemelo. They were roasting me last time. Just not Duma Gqubule roast. And then thanks Oxfam. If anything has to come out of this, Isabel and Loreen at Oxfam, let's try and create what Thoko is saying. Yeah. And let us try and do what Thoko is saying. And let's come back a year later and say, have we succeeded? Yeah. I just had to add to what she's saying. Yeah.
No, I really like that. And I think what also is coming out is that it seems like the budget, or we're understanding, or how you framed it actually, Duma, that if it's positioned that helping poor people will collapse the economy, what is all this economy for? Like, why are we paying taxes? Why are we investing? What's the purpose of this? Because we thought that it was to build a nation that works for all, right? So I think that thinking about that now I'm thinking that one of the issues, and I think you've mentioned it also, Thoko, is that there's a lot of neoliberals, and they don't even know it, but people don't realize that taxes and all of that, like it's our money. So for the longest time, and I know, people might feel a bit dragged. I don't mean it in a draggy way. It's from the most loving place, is that most people tune out of the budget speech. Like just want to hear, like, is alcohol going to go up? Is cigarettes going to go up? And then, they just get that. And then it's also like warped in your defense, people who've been tuned out of the budget speech, is that it's also wrapped up in language that is so inaccessible, right? But at the end of the day, like, it is our money, and every single rand that doesn't reach go towards building a public sector that works for all is actually, it's a theft of our money. And so I'm hoping that this year and this conversation also can give people this like we can have this reclaiming of public finances as Imali sees, where like the money, the nation's money, right? And know that, okay, Duma has given us a whole list of like where the money is and the tools that we can use, but also to engage with Treasury. It shouldn't have to be that you have to be an economist and know all of those things. Even your lived experience of a failing public sector, defunded public sector is good enough. Like that should be enough for Treasury to act, and I think that's where the courage is of like a public sector or public servants that actually want to serve the people. They have to be thinking, what can we do in our taxes and how we collect revenue, or how we take on debt in a way that actually heals these problems rather than further entrenches it and takes us down this path that we find ourselves in. And so I think maybe, like just to reflect on this, I'll take it back to you, Thoko, is that we're clear now that the economy are like in the pursuit of what's in the best interest of the market, they overlook what's in the best interest of the people. But how can we bring that human back into the economy? I think there has to be some kind of a call to civil society, for instance, of what can we do to, to ensure that like people are not like the default isn't, people being neoliberals on the internet, on like on podcast comments, and hopefully not on this one either. But what can we like actually do to, like how can we play our role in bringing back the heart, or like bringing people at the heart of our economy?
So I think, it's a tough question in the sense that it depends on how deep you want to go. Because if you think about how determined the anti-apartheid movement was and what people needed to do to drive what was then common sense, common knowledge. And remember, it wasn't necessarily the case that it was an easy fight, right? And we saw that the negotiated settlement meant that we now have the Stellenbosch mafia happily doing whatever they do. I mean, if you've been to those wine farms, it's unbelievable. And a friend of mine she has some very, very, very wealthy clients, and he has an annual party, and she was invited to this annual party, and so she had to fly to Cape Town, and then she asked me for a ride to the airport, and she was getting a chartered plane to Cradock so that they could have the party at his private game farm in Cradock, where they had massages, meals. These people are having a good time. And we have to be able to dig deep. And this is the same within the climate movement. What are we prepared to do to put a stop to all of this? What are the kinds of conversations that we need to have that center care, that center democratic principles, that center love, but also center resistance? And can we see a world in which we can resist the onslaught on the bodies of children that are starving in this country, while my friend gets to take a chartered plane, fully catered? They were asked, what do they want to eat on the plane? They had a private chef there to cater to them at the little center at the airport, like private place at the airport. And I realized then that this is not something that you're going to easily give up, right? And the reality is we have some billionaires in some very prominent positions in this country that are unlikely, with very fancy couches, that are unlikely to want to give this up, right? And I think it's important for us to learn from the movements across the world, but also within our own history of resistance, and to learn from the mistakes, right? We don't want to repeat the mistakes. We don't want another negotiated settlement, because the reality is The anti-apartheid movement wasn't fighting climate change. We are now responsible for fighting climate change now as well. So the call on us to be caring for each other and for the planet requires a type of resistance that we haven't seen before. But they're not going to give it up unless we take to the streets, unless we demand and put them on the spot, unless we go to Parliament and use these spaces to fight against their language, to say you are presenting an austerity budget, to go when they present the tax bills, that these are in the interests of the rich, not the poor. To go and protect our schools, to make sure our schools get resources. So there was an excellent campaign around the cuts to the teachers in the Western Cape. And we need to, as Duma was saying, we need to come together as collectives and support each other's issues so that we're not siloed. So education is not seen separate from Extinction Rebellion, is not seen separate from health, the community healthcare workers, or a water meter, the prepaid water meter resistance campaigns. Those are all linked in our ability to be able to articulate exactly what Duma can say in rands and cents, but we can now say, we are not going to put up with this. No more. Let's go and occupy. I'd be happy to go and occupy that little private airport place. They had some good coffee. So, occupy. We need to be visible. We need to reclaim the universal basic income grant as our own, because they see it as a cost, we see it as an investment. That is what we have to say, right? We see public schools as an investment. They see it as a cost. Enough with this language, right? They see women's bodies as a cost. No, we are not even an investment. We are the reproduction of life itself. So these are the kinds of campaigns and these beautiful stickers. And I think if we can come together and really put pressure, because at the moment, there isn't a lot of pressure on these decision makers to be able to say, I've read these documents for the last, and Duma's gone further back than me, but from 2012 to now, they have said exactly the same thing every year, saying growth is not happening, fiscal consolidation must be implemented, growth is not happening. And I start thinking, am I mad? Is this cut and paste? Have I lost my mind?
Yes,
Are we paying these people to just cut and paste every single year? And you know what they said in one of the speeches? One of the ministers, I can't remember which one, so I'm not going to misquote.
Yeah.
But my favorite was, in 2012, the announcement was, we have to do more with less. That's what they announced. By 2021, they said, we have to do more together with less. Quote, they are taking us for a mickey. We're letting them take us for a ride. No, I didn't see any sweating in any of those speeches. No sweating. In fact, one brought an aloe and said things are tough and look at my aloe. And, it's ridiculous. We've got to put pressure on them and say that we recognize the rhetoric and we're not going to accept it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so at this point, I think we've given our call to action that we're reclaiming this budget, we're reclaiming this economy, right? So I'd love to hear from the audience, or what questions you may have for us, for the panelists mainly, not so much, and comments as well, and just to see, are we really all on the same page and moving forward to reclaiming our economy and reclaiming it in a way that really works for us all. So,
Molweni, my name is Zimbini Madikiza, and I'm from Engaleni. I'm based there in the Eastern Cape. I am based in the rural areas. I stay with the people that really are the ones who are suffering when it comes to accessing, education, healthcare. Mine is just a comment to say, as a ground force, I'm well capacitated for the mobilizing and the organizing of the people when we are showing that visibility. So I just wanted to say that we're just going to want the time, date, and the venue. We're ready as the people. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aziza Rangunwala. I work in the climate and health space. I think it's so important what you said about the different intersections with the climate crisis, because a lot of the times it's like carbon emissions, but then there's hunger, but then there's teenage pregnancy, and everyone's not connecting the dots. Like they're not connecting the dots about how Israel is occupying Palestine, but also occupying Cape Town.
Yeah, exactly.
The DA is owned by Israel. And the important thing you said about what socialism means with NHI, transport, the taxi businesses being owned by politicians. Why? Why is ESCOM making a profit when we can't afford electricity? Why is a public utility making a profit? And things like NHI is also something we've been working on, and we hear a lot of skepticism. Because look at those 3 blue Lamborghinis. So how do we change the narrative of like, yes, we need these public goods, and we will make sure that the criminals, aka politicians, don't steal this money meant for public good? So the lack of trust is a huge issue in why we are in this poly crisis, and I wonder, how do we navigate it? How do we navigate those narratives and switch them up with facts? Because not everyone knows everything, but everyone can come to the table. Maybe we can have a playbook. Zionists have a playbook, and everyone, they just copy and paste. So maybe we should also copy and paste, because they're so sneaky about it. And now politicians are going to start using AI for their damn speeches as well, which is paid by Israel. So yeah, those are just very random things, but those are the things that you just sparked in me.
Nice.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here amidst such wealth minds and deep insights. My name is Winston Barikulunji, and mine is a submission. So from my perspective, as a displaced person from Uganda, struggling with mental health, I'm struggling to survive. I wrote this the day I saw the poster, when I got the invitation to this event. I'm struggling to survive on the streets of South Africa, and it's hard to think about a people-centered economy when I'm barely holding on. But hearing about an economy that prioritizes care and shared prosperity gives me hope. I wish I could be part of a community that values well-being over profit. As someone living with HIV/AIDS and bipolar disorder, I know what it's like to be excluded and marginalized. A people-centered economy sounds like a dream come true to me, where everyone has access to basic needs like food, shelter, and healthcare. I just wish I could see that happen in my lifetime. I'm tired of being treated like a burden, like I'm not worthy of dignity and respect. To me, a people-centered economy would recognize the value of every person, regardless of their circumstances and background. It would be a place where I can live without fear of being judged or rejected, or even walking on the streets. In my time being here, I've lost count of how many times I've been let down by the systems. Number one, by the DHA trying to get my documentations that are supposed to help me have my freedom of movement in this country. But an economy that prioritizes care, to me, a people-centered economy, means I can live with dignity and have access to basic needs. Then I'm all for it. I just wish it could happen sooner than rather. And my question is, what role can art, sound, and shared experience play in shaping a people-centered economy? And number two is, what are the potential challenges and obstacles to creating a people-centered economy, and how can we overcome them? Thank you for listening.
Hi. Okay. Should I just go? All right. My name is Mbulelo. As some of you know, I'm doing the PGCE at WIT so that I can teach economics next year. And I couldn't resist the opportunity to ask you to help me with my homework. So for our last class, we've been asked to reflect on what section of the economics curriculum or the textbooks you'd want to rip out, and which section do you wish that people understood more that you would want to add. The textbooks, by the way, are from 2012. They still have Angie Motsega's face in them. So there's a lot to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, that was so great. It's like coming straight from the heart. Let's do more of that. I love that. Okay, so yeah, I guess the first question maybe to Thoko would be like, when do we meet for this protest? Please share the details. You started this, so you better have answers and make sure that we won't forget, like we'll fall grounded in the rural experience, because often that's what gets left behind or left out. And then I think Aziza had a question about a playbook, in terms of the intersectionality. And I think both of you can actually answer that. Like, should we be developing that? Like, I think yes, and as the BJC, I'm thinking maybe I'll steal some of that. Maybe that's what we'll do next year, And then, yeah, I think just a lovely poem that shared, like, I've tried not to cry because don't want you to see me like that. But, this people-centered economy is something that can give us hope, and maybe we can be operating from a place of victory, that we've decided that that outcome is certain. We will build a people-centered economy. What can we do today to get there? And what challenges or obstacles may we face, or how do we overcome that? I think both of you actually have a lot to say on that. And yeah, I love the question about like, what exactly are what are we ripping out of the economics textbook? I think we can both, you guys can riff off each other.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'm down. Just call me. I'm ready. If it involves good coffee, even better. No, I think in some ways I can answer the point you raised about people-centered economy. Because the people-centered economy conversation comes right down to economics as a discipline, and how in and of itself it's an ideology. And there's some very interesting literature around the way in which the change from the early kind of sociologists, philosophers, kind of running kind of social humanities-based scholars were very much involved in the conversations around the economy. And that has slowly changed to the discipline of economics, to which now economists run pretty much everything. It's kind of a kind of a discipline that is overarching. And they get taught about Homo economicus, I can never pronounce it, Homo economicus, who is a man who is self-interested, who's only interested in profit, doesn't think about care, and doesn't see nature and doesn't see women. So it's completely. So if you ask me what to rip out, I would say you've got to rip out pretty much most of your macro, because it is not based on any real, these stylized facts, which you'll know that is used. It's not based on any real. So we can't even begin to have a conversation where we're meeting each other with National Treasury, because we're talking completely different languages. They're talking about, so the interesting thing is, and there's an economist who has said now quite a few times, and legitimately, and I think he believes it, because at first I thought, is he just playing politics and he's saying this? But he's saying it is politically unfeasible to consider revenue-raising options now in South Africa because of what happened to VAT.
Sure.
And all of his little economics friends are saying yes, because they're doing some kind of fancy table in their head, some kind of curve that is telling them that when it gets to this point in the curve, it's impossible. And so now it's literally rational choice there. Like, it's madness. So when I say, no, but just tax the rich, no, my little curve, it's not going to work, right? So when we talk about a people-centered economy that moves away from investments, moves away from cost to investment, moves away from exploitation to reparations, sort of redistribution, all the R's. You can look to, if you're wanting to think about literature, is the ecofeminist literature, donut economics, degrowth, modern monetary theory. There are a plethora of options that are telling us that we can center people and planet and function in a way. Marx was very clear that exploitation was the basis of economic activity, and that needed to change. So this isn't rocket science. We're not like, coming up with anything. So you could look at Yanis Varoufakis, who has a macro textbook. So he's an alternative theorist that you can look at in terms of macro, because that's my focus is on macro. I don't know much about micro, but macroeconomics is where. So I'd love this point about putting back into economics the human, and putting back into economics this call for living with dignity. I think that's an incredibly powerful rights-based call that needs people to be seen in all of their abilities. So it's an approach around abilities as opposed to this cost problem or like this evil kind of individual that's maximizing and only about profit. So yeah, I think, we do need to read. I mean, it's beautiful. There's beautiful books around here that we can read. And there's a lot of examples. I think the degrowth for us is a call for us to think critically, because we need growth of some kind. But what can it look like from a South African perspective? But it's a very powerful narrative about consumption, I come out of the Extinction Rebellion movement. There's a lot about repair and about reusing and about stitching and reclaiming what we already have in a way that we don't have. We don't actually need to dig out any more gold or diamonds. We have enough. But it's this idea that in order to grow, we need to amass. So even that has to be questioned, and that we could have a very circular economic system that is both caring to people and to planet. So I think there's quite a wealth of literature out there. And I think the economics discipline has a lot to answer for. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Just some brief comments. Zimbini, I'm with you. I don't know, anyway, yeah, I'm with you. The second one, Aziza, when you were talking about the playbook and Thoko was talking about copy and cut and paste, I remember I once wrote that we could dispense with the finance ministers. They are puppets of the officials who write the same speeches every year. You could use an AI tool to do the budget, because literally every single budget, as Thoko was saying, we have to go through the pain of reading this. It's exactly the same as the previous one. Nothing changes from year to year. That's the second thing. And then the lack of trust, it's way above my pay grade. But what I see is when people come, they say, okay, we agree with you. And then what, So I look at in the New Deal in the US in the 30s, they set up temporary agencies, which they called alphabet agencies, to spend the money of the New Deal, Roosevelt. And we should innovate in terms of a new public, private, community, worker-led governance structure that's going to monitor, set targets, set policy, but also have professional management. So we have the urgent ones we need to set up for me are the one for jobs, the one for health. Those are the two ones that I think we must set up. And the other ones will follow. Do you see what I'm saying? So we must find a way of innovating in terms of the institutional design while the government gets its act in order. Winston, the way we treat international migrants is shameful in South Africa. I went to school in Eswatini at the age of 11. I was Pan-African from a very early age. My father was the head of the church in South Africa, Methodist Church. So we used to travel a lot in the region as children and, as it were, you go to Zimbabwe, you stay with the bishop in the country. But I'm just saying, so as from a young age, we need one Africa, and we must stop this xenophobia in South Africa. Xenophobia, blaming others, it'll never take you anywhere, you know. But anyway, and then the final one is Bulelo. I think she's giving you, I don't even know where to start, but you know, a lot of the stuff I learned in university in Scotland, I had to relearn. I had to re-educate myself, you know. And I'll just give you one example. She was talking about MMT. So I think it was 2016. You know, I was spared off the tyranny of the school run. My kids went to their mums in Ethiopia and in Tanzania. So I decided to read MMT. And what started throughout the Christmas holiday, you know, and I was reading about modern monetary theory. It's a lens in which you understand how the economy works, how we can use public money to solve our issues, the Budget Justice Coalition. I know. And then the last thing I want to say is that, Thoko, I forgot to say, there's an appendix in the budget where they show the basic income grants that we give to the companies, the employment tax incentive. What's it called? The medical aid tax credit.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. What's it called?
Expenditure.
Tax expenditure. Yeah. The tax expenditure statement.
Yeah.
It shows all the things, the freebies we give to the government. So when they say there's no revenue raising, they must just go to the table, the wasteful employment tax incentive, and all the other things, the freebies, the basic income grants that we give to universal basic income for these companies, you know, and we must go there as well. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I'm happy to, if it ends up in discussion later for the sake of brevity, if, you know, to my mind, the central contradiction that South Africa sort of expresses very clearly is that we simultaneously say there's not enough to go around and there's not enough work to do. We have high unemployment and we can't provide for people. But I'm particularly interested because it sounds like it's your wheelhouse with the UBIs that we do. It struck me when I was doing rural research years ago, when I went to the local town and went to the ShopRite, that there were these huge queues, social grants only. And I subsequently took a look at some stats on my own, some perhaps too simple curves, but it struck me that if I compared the income from social grants for the lower 40% of the population and expenditure on food, they were almost a complete overlap. So to my mind, social grants were moving through the bodies of our people and ending up in the accounts of ShopRite. So in one sense, this is, you know, anathemic to us, the idea of people profiting off of public money. But on another sense, to speak to your point of UBI not being a cost, but a source of investment, public money being channeled through consumption to promote domestic investments and production. I wonder what mechanisms there might be to prevent the bleed into things like imports, so that if public money is given to people, that it finds its way into domestic businesses that create jobs, and that although it's not a resolution to the problem I said at the beginning, which is a capitalism problem, maybe it can flex it. Maybe we can have a way in which we can try to introduce a logic that the more South Africans eat, the more South African jobs there are, and the more South African jobs there are, the more South Africans can eat.
Nice.
Thank you. So, yeah, okay. All right. So my name is Nicholas Ikata. I'm just going to read my question. So the current narrative of solving unemployment in South Africa is reindustrialization fueled by foreign direct investment. Is there, in your imagination, of a different economy place for strengthening township and informal economies to absorb unemployment, or is the push to formal sector the only way to solve unemployment? Thanks.
Nice.
Thank you very much. My name is Mpo. So mine is on just transition. So the just transition promises fair, equitable, and inclusive economy. But I believe that for us to the big question is actually who are the role players around this. And I believe that to have a fair and equitable, inclusive economy, it means someone has to give up something so that particularly the capitalists need to be willing to work with the people on the ground. So my question is, what needs to be done to create pragmatic, community-led policies that really, truly reflect the challenges that people in townships and rural areas face? Thank you.
Nice.
Well, those last three questions are definitely a hard act to follow. I'm Emihle Majigija. My focus is primarily on education. So how do we build an education, particularly basic education system in South Africa that works for everyone? Now, to my question, here's the thing that I'm just fighting within my head, that I'm trying to tease out the tensions in this, right? So there's a couple of things that have been alluded to by the panel, even addressed in some of the questions that have come up. And in my head, I find that they seem to speak to how we need to be imagining a different South Africa, and we need to be thinking about how we can work with what already exists, or maybe even recreate the economy. We speak of reclaiming the economy, and maybe I want to suggest we're not reclaiming the economy. We're claiming it, because it hasn't actually been fundamentally disrupted from the very colonial, racist, etc., basis or the foundations on which it was built, right? And as I think about that, and looking at the moment that we're in now, 30 years into democracy as a country, right? I think about how in the formation of this movement that you speak of, that wants us to think critically and demand better and demand different, fundamentally, of how money, how state money, how public finances are raised and spent. What I then begin to think of is how in the apartheid movement that I believe you alluded to, there was a whole of society approach in the form of, for example, the democratic movement as a whole that seemed to transcend even party lines, that seemed to even transcend, to an extent, ideological lines. What does it take for us then in this moment to tear down those silos, to even tear down the difficult, the difficult terminology that makes economics inaccessible to the everyday person? What does it take for us to now actually start building progress and sustaining momentum towards thinking about and demanding and creating a different economy in South Africa, demand of us to do? So what do we do to actually build a people's movement? Even as we do the work, how do we then get a people's mandate that drives the things that we think should be prioritized, and how we think a new economy that we will then want to claim should look like and be built? Thank you. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks to the panelists. Just one question. I think as civil society, as people who are interested in progressive economics, have been on the higher ground for a long time. Civil society has been on the right side for a long time. Like we know, we understand, we're against austerity, we're against neoliberalism. I think the gap has always been linking what we think and what is happening in the practical lives of people. And we struggle a lot with that as civil society, especially in South Africa. No one is coming to a protest in parliament because we're fighting austerity and neoliberalism. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean anything to people. I'm saying this because I'm born in Tembisa Hospital. My friends work in Tembisa Hospital. My mother worked as a nurse in Tembisa Hospital. And I believe in NHI, I believe in universal health care. But after people told me that there's 2 billion stolen, I'm not sure anymore. And this is the problem we have with the politics that we drive here. Higher ground, we make sense, we care about people, we care about care, we care about gender. But we're nowhere to be found when Tembisa is looted 2 billion rand. So I think when we want to talk about building a movement that is fighting austerity, that is fighting neoliberalism, we have to talk about the practical impacts of the people. And I think we're not talking about that here. We talk about how we need to consider gender and other things, But we don't talk about the community healthcare workers who are mostly women who are now outsourced in this health system. We don't talk about people in that instance. And these are frontline workers. No one is saying they must get a better wage, but we want NHI. So I think it's very important for us as economists and progressive people and people want to change things and care about things to just move away from being correct and just holding a higher ground. We must care about Thembiso Hospital. We must care about community healthcare workers in the streets. We must care about things that are practically affecting people. And I'm saying to you, I can sit here and we can have an echo chamber that we agree with universal healthcare and NHI, but when I go home, I'm not sure because that money might go to Lamborghinis. So I'm really, really not in a good position. And I think that we need to move from that stance of being correct and being people who care and those who are right to actual people's struggles. Yeah. We must say something about Thembiso. We must say something about other things that are happening. Someone spoke about the teachers being cut in Western Cape. They ended up being cut anyway because we didn't go out to make sure that we defend those teachers. What happened in February around the budget being cut and let's raise the VAT, and if you're a person who's looking at public opinion and public discussion, there was no sense of any alternative sense of pushing because we were just being right and being text-rich, but there was no movement. So I think we need to start thinking about that. We have the policies, we have the ideas, we have the politics, we have the economics. How do we then link it to people's struggles? Thanks.
To Alex, there is a campaign around food issues. I think we must integrate what's it called, this campaign around food?
Union Against Hunger.
Yeah, the Union Against Hunger. Yeah. So let's bring them in and let's discuss the issues that Alex was talking about. But I must mention that food is mostly domestically produced. It's not going to go out as imports, yeah. The second issue about reindustrialization, I want to say that there's no one, the ANC, they talk about reindustrialization in every meeting. It's like a slogan. And they do nothing about it. And they talk about beneficiation, industrialization. But my argument is that the problem is so large, you can't just do one thing and create jobs for 12.6 million people. Manufacturing employment as a percentage of total employment over the past 16 years has gone from 14 to 9.9%. So if we double employment in manufacturing, it doesn't solve the problem. It's not enough. So we must think about all these campaigns that we're talking about. Let's link these campaigns, and that is what's going to get us to full employment here. On the just transition, all I want to say, there can't be a just transition in the context of austerity. Look at the unemployment situation in Mpumalanga. It's usually number 3 in the country. And it's a shocking situation in Mpumalanga. Unless we look at the macro in Mpumalanga, and then we have all the things that we're talking about. We can't have a just transition now. Is just a slogan that the government repeats. It's meaningless, it's got no content, and it's quite frankly offensive, yeah. And then the final one is that education. I'm a bit extreme on education. Let's equalize the two education systems. My son started school in Eastern Europe, and he didn't know what the difference between a public and a private school is. So when he came here, we took him to a public school. The mother's a socialist, So she says government school. A very good one, by the way. This guy cried for months, He says, it's winter, why are we having assembly outside? And then every day there was a problem, It's a good school, by the way. And then we took him out to a Karabo Maya school. And then the average class size was 10. They had 3 meals, vegetarian meals. So I'm just saying We must equalize these two education systems. If I was in charge, there would be no, I went to a private school in Eswatini, there would be no private schools, there'd be no public schools, yeah. So, yeah, and then yes, you're right, we must link these campaigns with the people's struggles. And then the playbook, we must repeat. Like Treasury does, the playbook, we must have a common message that we all agree with each other and repeat each other. Like they do, they repeat stuff that doesn't make sense. And they repeat it for 14 years. We must continue to repeat. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks.
The township economy, the last one on the township economy. You know what? No, man. I think it's another ANC slogan that is meaningless. To be quite frank, a lot of these places, we have to raise them. I remember going to China just before COVID, and they showed us the place where they just raised what they call a township, and they built a new place, you know. But obviously we can't do that. But I'm just saying, we must now, some of these places shouldn't continue to exist. I think some of them we have to raise them. People do not live a life of dignity. Let's imagine new places where people can live. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just to end off, I'm going to end off with a slightly controversial point. I think we have to be very, very, very careful about the way in which we talk about corruption in this country in particular. Again, it's smoke and mirrors. The level at which, and yes, it's terrible. The impact is awful. It has a real life. People get shot, killed. It's a dog-eat-dog world. But it's chump change compared to illicit financial flows. It is chump change compared to what we give in terms of subsidies. It is chump change in terms of wage evasion. So it's a smoke and mirrors. Oh, look, Lamborghinis. And I said, it's like, you see the Lamborghinis, but we're not talking about Camps Bay. The entire Camps Bay, which is literally corrupt. That money is not legitimate money. It is illicit. It's based off illicit finances. It's based off keeping people's wages down. So be very, very careful when saying corruption versus taxation. Corruption can't tax the wealth. It's a very neat little line that suddenly, because they're corrupt, they often is the language, and because they are corrupt, we can't trust them with running the country. It becomes a very dangerous, very, very, very dangerous conversation. And so let's keep corruption as a concern, but let's remind ourselves, as Duma is saying, the playbook here is illicit financial flows, it's wage evasion, it's tax avoidance, it's all of those kinds of things, which is billions to trillions of rands that are being stolen. Not to mention the actual physical wealth that gets stolen. So that's even before you get to the illicit story. They're taking goods out of the wealth out of the country. So I want to end off with, I love the quote, claiming the economy, and that it has to be a whole of society approach. And the left is very good at complaining about the left. And we are very good at saying, where are the people? It's like every left meeting, it comes up, where are the people? And the reality is it starts with the people in the room. And we create the networks like the mycelium. If we're not having conversations with the teachers who are getting their jobs cut, then that's on us, not on anybody else. And we can't say that, you know, this is all nice conversations and nice talk, but where are the people? I'm with the people. I know exactly where my people are. I know what's blowing up on my WhatsApp and who's being affected how. The reality is we need to do this doggedly, consistently, and we have to care for each other as we do it, because like the comrade was saying, this is really hard work. This is at a body level, right? It's about a dignity level. So being activists is not easy, but it can be done, and another world is and will be possible.
I thought that was like really great, and I thought like the questions that were asked, even the difficult ones, were just so important. I agree with what you had said, Thoko, about like the left and like constantly, and it's about us in the room in rebuilding that. And then also at the same time, I do also agree with that call that we should constantly be almost like sacrificing ourselves and remembering that it's not about our posture, our ego, but we are public servants ourselves. We are serving the people, and how much of our mandate are we getting from engaging with public service users, especially as we go climb up in the space and in our careers. How much of our message are we getting from people who use the services and like our communities, and how much are we getting from donors, and does that align? Because if we don't do that, then we also reproduce the very problems that we are criticizing government and the economy for. So I thought that was like a really important a really important contribution, and something that we should be taking forward and constantly questioning ourselves. And also just in general, I think that whole comment about this is just the beginning. We are yappers. I think I can speak for everyone here. We love to talk about economic justice because we are serious about the building an economy that works for all. So literally, like, I'm going to put them on the spot, but if you reach out to Thoko or Duma, like, they'll be happy to answer any questions, even if maybe you're still formulating the question now, but like later on you actually have it. Like, please feel free to reach out. And if you struggle to reach out, you can reach out to me because I now have connections and stuff. So if you need, if you want to ask them or anything like that, or ask anyone or ask any of these questions, like, we want to have these conversations over and over again. And, thank you very much to the New Economy Hub and for Oxfam for facilitating these conversations, like in it's like a party for people who care about the economy. So I love that for us. And just hoping that we take on, like, we carry that in our hearts as we move on. And it's not just like, oh, we had this conversation, but like, let's continue to have it. And like, let's continue to have it over drinks after this. So I'll end over there. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being so engaged also. I'm so energized from you. I'm sure you can feel the vibe. But anyway, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, everyone.
My name is Isabel, and I'm the G20 Senior Policy Advisor at Oxfam. Well done to all of you who are still here and who braved the rain. I think this was actually an incredibly useful apparatus. I want to just say a few words to wrap up the series that we've been having here. And some of these are just thoughts because I'm encouraged by the yappers. One of the things that came up a lot was the reference to the anti-apartheid movement. And I think that we can learn from that, but we also need to recognize that this is a global movement that we're now part of. And we need to be looking and seeing how we are able to connect with the other global movements. And I'll conclude, hopefully, Sek, that I will remember about the We the 99. I was at the UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago, and everybody from the global north was terrified about the collapse of multilateralism. And I couldn't help but think that it's actually it has a lot of potential, because multilateralism and the power relations that were set up around it certainly were not to benefit the global south. I think we need to seize the opportunity, look at alternatives, the ones that cause such fear, like BRICS, China, Russia, and actually put forward what our demands are for the renegotiation. I love the fact, Thoko, that you were talking, in fact, everybody was talking about care is the counter-narrative, and it's the counter-narrative to extraction. We talk about how South Africa was built on extraction and continues, but capitalism is built on extraction. It's the surplus profit, and how that needs to be allocated to us and amongst us. Just in terms of another world is possible, I'll use names now because we're off record, right? No, maybe not. So a certain person from the Reserve Bank that Duma and I reached out to ask if they would be part and parcel of his discussion 2 weeks ago. I came across her recently in a social setting, and she turned to a former Minister of Finance, who we know and love very well, and said to him, Isabel and Duma were wanting someone from the Reserve Bank to come and speak at this panel. She said, then I looked at the panel and I realized they just wanted to attack us. So I said, no, not at all. We wanted to discuss. We wanted to debate and looking and seeing another world. I mean, as my comrades here were saying, they're the ones that are setting the monetary policy that year on year is not growing the economy and is causing us to become more impoverished and hunger and starvation. But she was adamant that she was not going to engage in any discussion before fear of, I don't know, I mean, have we killed anyone here recently? Not that I know. But hunger does kill. Just a couple more points. So I'm a lawyer. I'm not an economist. And recently, today I was writing up a foreword to a report on inequality that Oxfam South Africa is doing. And I just realized how we've been sleeping as civil society. I mean, our constitution guarantees as an inalienable right, the right to dignity, to life, and to equality. Our socioeconomic rights that we talk about in terms of austerity have a clause built in that if the state is not going to progressively realize, they need to justify. And there is jurisprudence, international jurisprudence as to what that means. Why have we not been taking the state to court? I mean, the IEJ victory was really good. And of course, government immediately appealed that. But we have the tools. They are not the same as a mass-based movement. And we need to start with that. But we have the tools. And so we, especially ones who have time on our hands, need to start building those cases. So at Oxfam, we've been able to punt the idea to the president to establish an extraordinary committee on inequality, which he has done. And under the chair of Professor Stiglitz, who I realize is actually just the same as all of us, just a bit older. And he's also done some really great work, okay? But so, I mean, the interesting thing is that the president is happy to establish this international committee of experts on global inequality. And yet we have seen nothing at a local, national level on inequality. I also thought we need to be demanding targets for reducing inequality. We need to demand annual reduction targets, and we need to be building that into reviews. We need to be reaching out to the IMF and the credit rating agencies and saying, well, this is part of parcel of what you need to be reviewing on. These are tools that we have at our hands in our dispensation. We need to be using them. So I think the idea, in fact, I made the notes before the session, but I was saying we need a broad alliance. Anti-austerity, yes, but also anti-inequality, so pro-equality. I think campaigns are better if they're pro something than anti. But incorporating these as being part and parcel of it. We need to demand equality because it can be done. But I just want to end off with a number of thanks. I want to, and my own experience. So in working with New Economy Hub, we've developed really, really strong relationships. We've had robust engagements. And I realized that my own way of engaging is sort of mirrored in an old school idea of how things get done. So I've been humbled, and I want to thank you very much for teaching me. I want to thank Oxfam, Lorato, and Loreen. You were incredible. And of course, Breeze Block, Portia, and others. So you've had wonderfully curated cuisine. I also want to thank Solid Gold, Gavin and Caleb and many others for doing the sound. I also want to thank all of you because you've come, you've challenged, you've absorbed. It was a bit of a risk when we started this because someone said, why would anyone want to come out on a Sunday afternoon and talk about sort of fiscal and monetary theory? But thank you. So to all of you, particularly those who came out in the rain, I said that I would love to go to a space where there are people that I know and like, and there is food, music, and for those who still drink, it's like most of us don't drink anymore. But for those of you who still drink, there was also the bar. So thank you. And I think that we need to have a kind of roundabout popular demand, and we might be back or in Cape Town. To Camp, I want to thank you for not only creating very provocative images. I don't think anyone will forget the one, you'll all know the one that I'm talking about. But also enabling us to make stickers and to take them home. That's incredible. So 2 more things I want to say. Yay! So for all of you who want to know where to be on the week of the 20th to the 23rd of November. That's known, I call it the Summits Week, because there is a particular summit of world leaders, but also there is the We the 99 People Summit, which is happening from the 20th to the 22nd of November at Con Hill. And there, questions of austerity and alternatives will be debated. There is also the G20 Social Summit, because at Oxfam we believe in working both on insider and outsider tracks. So let us know if you are interested in attending that. And then finally, I'm going to hand over to Fez, who is going to introduce the last show. So thank you. Fez is not part of NEH, but she's actually been the person who's kept this all together.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be super brief. Firstly, thank you to New Economy Hub and Oxfam for engaging this cultural worker. That is me, who was trained as a political scientist and was also trained as a historian, but was also trained as an artist. And the art is really where the clarity, the political will, and the ability came from. And it has been really important for me to situate our most brilliant cultural workers in this country in this conversation with some of our most brilliant economists. Because as one of the gentlemen said, he said, you know, we're not really talking about Tembisa Hospital. You know who is? The artists. And the artists continue, and they continue to be truth tellers, and they continue to hold our government to account, and they continue to situate the real implications of the political world in which we live. And so I just quickly want to read Arundhati Roy's essay that you might all be familiar with, A Porthole in the Pandemic. She writes this in 2020. And she says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and our smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And I think in very many ways, the conversations that we've been having for the last 5 weeks have been trying to situate us in the new, but they are used in the grammars of the old. And so that's why it's been really important for me to bring in the artistic intent, the artistic ability, and the artistic imagination. And so to clarify, artistic work is not so that you can shake your hips and be like, oh, that was so lovely. It is about a political imagination that is new. It is real, provocative work that shifts and creates new worlds. And so the work of Camp is deeply important. The work of AK Jenkins, incredibly important. And of course, the work that we're getting today is tremendously important. So I'd like you to all, give a hand to our incredible panel. And I invite you to walk into the possibility of a new world. Thank you.
About the economy just riffing and engaging and thinking about what an alternative economy looks like, because I think for a long time, like rightfully so, we criticize, but a lot of people don't actually know that there are people who are doing so much work towards actually building and coming up with solutions. And I think the next few years will be looking towards centering solutions and like just engaging with communities and engaging with the people. So I think that was generally that. And I think it also just delved into an opportunity for audience members who are also activists at heart and care deeply about the economy to also share what's in their hearts. So it ended up being really, it felt like a session where we were hanging out with friends and didn't want the party to end because we just want to keep talking and building and dreaming a better world into existence.
I'd say that I really enjoyed this thing. This whole series, I went to 4 of the five events, and I just want to say to Oxfam and to the New Economy Hub, this was an amazing initiative. Nobody thought that people would come out on Sundays, and they came out with their children today and the last week, the 2 weeks ago, and it was an amazing event. But it mustn't stop here. We must take this struggle into a different format and find ways of engaging. What people said at the end, the last question, is that we've got to link what we're saying with the people's, the people's experiences on the ground here.
I think it was my first time, and I had an amazing experience, and I'm coming all the way from the Eastern Cape. I actually did enjoy the session, and I think it was very much well facilitated to start with and engaging with the people, right?
Every time I do an event, and more especially with the Economy's Care series, it just reminds me about my journey apart from Breeze Block, where I come from, and how this is like a piece of the final piece of the puzzle fitting in. So yeah, it wasn't planned, but I'm here. And what I've seen with my experience with Breeze Block is what drew me and what keeps me is the commitment of the community of Brixton. Their support, their presence, the essence that it creates through the community's support.
Today we kind of bemoaned the issue of Thembiso Hospital, and I think the economists did a great job to situate us, but the artists clarified it. And often we think that arts is this thing that is just over there, it's the periphery, it's the nice to have. But even during the pandemic, we all turned to the art to remind us of our humanity. And so that tells us something deeply intrinsic about what it is to be human and what it is to situate yourselves as a political and social being.
I think that something that I really like is that this idea that for a long time conversations of the economy are held between a small group of people, and it seems like you have to be an economist to have that, to care about that. But this series of events, and especially today, just felt like actually we're just people behind all of this, and it's public finance is our money and we take ownership. So it actually doesn't matter like what your qualification, in fact, what your background is, like just adds to this melting pot, or like coming up with solutions that actually work. And also that we know how to have a good time. We're not just like strict and behind graphs and all these complex things. We're just people behind all of this who just care so deeply about making our country work for everyone. So I'm hoping less formal dialogues and more parties. Like I'm for that, and I like having a good time, so I'm in a good place right now.
I think there's a positive. People are saying that we need to start an anti-austerity movement. We need to, because we've got the tools, we've done the economic analysis about the crisis, and we have to unite in civil society across political parties. We must make this something that a rallying call that changes an economy and creates an economy that cares, an economy that's centered around people, and not an economy that's centered around markets. What we see with every budget, they go to Washington and they go to London and they talk to the people, the markets, the people who have our bonds. That is not what matters. What matters is the people. And this is what this whole series was about. It was creating an economy that cares. We are talking about, we have to take profit out of certain parts of our economy. We have to stop the excessive financialization of this economy, where a voracious financial sector is, finding ways to profit from people's basic income, the grants, and taking profit out of every section of society. So we are saying, let's create a care economy. Let's have education, take profit out of education, take profit out of health, take profit out of electricity. South Africans, including middle-class South Africans, can't afford these electricity prices. They've increased since 2007 by 940%. That is insane. So we have to find an economy that works for our people and doesn't work for the minority, the rich, and the people who are in the stock exchange and financial markets. Yeah.
I think the talking points were really resonating with, the living conditions and the livelihoods of the people that I work with in the rural communities, right? And also, I think it really made sense to talk about what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about care and economy, what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about whose economy is it anyway? Like, whose economy is it anyway? Luqoqosho efanele lisebenzela obani, and also I think the points around, advancing services for the people, the point of, I think what stood out for me is that I want to see if I remember what Thoko said, but Thoko said something amazing around the social services being seen as costing, being seen as cost, and then as civil society seeing those as investment, because if we really advance those social services for people, those people will be able to contribute into the economy, right? And I think the other part, Duma was really, it was my first time, being in a session whereby we hear about the fact that as a country we do have money, but I think what I got there was a matter of how do we then also advocate for just good coordination of, the funds, the money that we collect. Like how can we have that? And then what came into my mind is that City also said something that I think resonates with solution-based in terms of, can we have an economy that is having public servants who lead with love, who lead with passion. I think that would really bring in the understanding of care, because if you're leading with love, if you're a public servant who really understands that this money is supposed to do this and that, we're supposed to bridge this high inequality gap between the rich and the poor. You need to be someone who understands that, you need to be someone who's in position of decision making, who understands the gap between the rich and the poor. So I think that's what really came. Yeah, I think that's what I actually experienced and understood. And as a person who is really at a grassroots level, I believe that I am capacitated in terms of, increasing awareness, in terms of strengthening grassroots activism, in terms of, we understand that siyasokola, but when it comes to solution-based discussions, what is being discussed in certain spaces, I'm able to cascade the information down to the people who are not in the room, but I carry them in my shoulders wherever I go. Enkos.
To my understanding and with what I've heard, it spoke a lot about my journey personally. I'm in the entrepreneurial space for over 15 years now and full-time 13 years. So talks around, for example, dependence on government, it basically cheered me on in the sense that you've done it, you know, without the dependence, without waiting. Because basically my whole journey up until Breeze Block rides on no funding. I just did it on my own. So for me, it's a big plus for the fact that I'm a tangible example that it can be done if you are determined enough. Keeping in mind that the economy is the economy, there should be dependence, but it shouldn't kill you if it doesn't come your way. You know, it's possible to work around it and still win and still do something.
I do have hope for the future. However, at some point I lose it. I lose it because of my mental health conditions, my anxieties, my worries for what is next. But one good thing about today is I met beautiful souls. The theme of today, economy, is care, not only for me, but to others, because I personally am a product of compassion. I've gone through strange hands, people I don't know coming in to help me, to stand in for me, to defend me. And I'm here because of them.
I think we did really fantastic work, impactful work, and I think we went across genre almost. We brought really fantastic economists in conversation with some amazing cultural workers, and I think there was real imagination in the way that the series was done.
We must take profit out of electricity. We must invest in Eskom. If it means that there must be Eskom 2 renewables, that's fine. But we must keep the cost of electricity down. So what this means in practice is that the government has to subsidize now households and companies which can't afford this electricity prices. You've seen, for example, our manufacturing sector has been decimated. Manufacturing employment has come down from 14% in 2008, 14.2% of total employment to 9.9%, and 425,000 jobs lost. It coincides with this massive increase in electricity prices. So companies can't afford it, households can't afford it. So we now have to subsidize companies and we have to subsidize household. So this is the hidden costs of this path that we've taken. Yeah.
So I'm sure that We the 99 is going to be a really important initiative. I think it's going to be really important to situate the stories of the people that the G20 summit suggests that they talk about, but in fact it doesn't. It talks about really elite politics, politicians, and We the 99 is really trying to situate the ordinary people who are disenfranchised, who are dealing with real immense violence, systemic violence, physical violence, political violence. And I think it's really important to give time and space to that particular project. And so that's what I hear is next. I'm not necessarily part of that, but thrilled that there's a platform for that kind of work.
I think the next step is really to continue these conversations in different spaces. I think the call for thinking beyond silos was quite important. And so to try and think about having these conversations around different sectors, health, education, climate justice, those kinds of things, trying to broaden it out. I think that's important. I think there's also an important next step around, is there space for us to navigate a kind of campaign of some sorts? I know it was kind of suggested that we think of a positive as opposed to an anti-austerity. So maybe, an economy for all, or, sort of state around the medium-term budget policy statement, which will be happening in November. So that's really that kicks off our budget season. And for those of us that do budget advocacy, it's an important moment in our calendar. And so to be able to get these conversations into those spaces, into Parliament, becomes kind of the next step for me, at least.